Betsy, why don't you start the recording and give me control, and then we will begin. All right, looks like we're recording. Welcome, everybody. I'm so delighted. We are going to be having a fascinating hour of exploration into feminine leadership, right? With our own Shakti here, Nilima Bhat, this is a topic I'm very, very interested in. I'm going to be learning along with you during this call. I've actually read Nilima's book and I've talked to Nilima a lot, but I have a lot of questions for her that I have not had answers to yet. So I'm going to be learning along with you during this hour. So I want to say a little bit about Zoom, about the platform using, a little bit about the topic, introduce Nilima, and then turn things over to her. So if you're unfamiliar with Zoom, just know that if you look down at the bottom, you have to kind of run your mouse around a little bit. This is assuming you're using the web interface. If you're calling in, you'll just be listening. If you're just on the phone, there's a chat button, and so you can actually chat with the other participants. And also, if you press the participants button, you'll see the list of participants. You can actually raise your hand at some point later in the call. If we have time at the end for Q&A, we'll be able to unmute you. I think, can we? Yes, we'll be able to, I guess we can turn you into a panelist temporarily to ask a question. That's how we'll do it. Good, so we can, you'll also be able to ask questions on the chat, so you can actually type stuff into the chat while we're talking, and we'll then try to get to the questions later. We may not get to them right away. But so this is the technology platform we're using, which we find very useful for our longer programs. Good, and then so that's, I just wanted to give you that little primer, and then I'm going to just say a little bit about the topic, a little bit about Nilima, and we'll dive in here. So the topic of feminine leadership is something that's been of great interest to me for some years now, because my trusted sources, my higher guidance has said to me that balancing the forces of masculine and feminine is the great project of our time. They use those exact words. As those of you who know me, my name is Tim Kelley, by the way. If you don't know me, I'm involved in a lot of things, mostly involving higher purpose and self-organizing leadership, but that's for another call. This sense that the new world we're trying to create depends specifically on our ability to balance the forces of masculine and feminine is very much on my mind. Interestingly, I don't talk about it a lot unless I'm in a conversation like this one or leading a men's group. And the reason is that most of the things I talk about, like higher purpose or self-organizing leadership, are actually easier to understand, but fundamentally, those are strategies for balancing the forces of masculine and feminine in our society. So the underlying job, and you don't have to believe me, this is just how I see it, the underlying job in creating the new paradigm and creating the heaven on earth is balancing the forces of masculine and feminine. And all these other techniques are techniques for doing that. And I'm not surprisingly an artifact of masculine leadership. I've worked my way up through the ranks in the US Navy and Oracle Corporation, et cetera, et cetera. So as Dirty Harry said, a man's got to know his limitations. It's not entirely my job to bring the divine feminine leadership back into the culture. I know it needs to be done, but I don't think I'm the ideal messenger for that. I have some basic limitations that get in my way. I do the best I can, which is better than many, but to do the job properly, we need people like Nilima, who are actually themselves expressions of feminine leadership and the divine feminine. And fortunately, there are a few women around like this, but not many in my experience. Many women who are expressing power are actually expressing masculine power, and feminine power is almost entirely unconscious in our society and our culture, in my personal opinion. I'll be interested to hear more from Nilima, how she feels about that. But so I'm really delighted and felt very strongly about putting an example, an exemplar of feminine leadership in front of you, so that those of you who've heard me talk about this could tell what the hell I'm talking about. And Nilima can tell us in her own words in a minute. So Nilima, like me and like many of you, logged her time in corporate America, or actually it wasn't corporate, India in her case. She's in Bangalore right now, joining us in the morning. So Mumbai. She worked, I'm sorry, Mumbai. Okay, my mistake, yeah. Sorry. And so she worked at Philips, she worked at ESPN, she's worked with Microsoft, she's worked at the UN, she's worked with many different organizations as a facilitator, as a consultant, as a corporate PR person and corporate communications person as well. In addition to that, like me and like many of you, she has a whole spiritual side and training as a yogini, and has taught shadow workshop, has taught people how to become conscious through their journey with cancer. She has a program that she leads for women where she takes them all around the world, teaching them about feminine leadership and about the power, feminine power within them, and how to integrate that into their leadership as change agents seeking to change the world. We're going to hear all about this and as much as we can pack into this hour, and I'm hoping that we won't get so caught up in it that we won't have time at the end for some Q&A from you. So anyway, Nilima, good morning and welcome, and thank you so much for carving out time to do this with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Tim. That was an amazing introduction. You packed it all in, and your trusted sources are with you.
Yeah, so I actually left that out, that you're a purposeful, trusted source, connected kind of gal. And for those of you who are aficionados of the true purpose process, she is on the path of piety. Some of you will know what that means. So
I assume that means the path of surrender.
It does. That is exactly what that means. As opposed to guys like me who feel free to ignore our trusted sources if we wish to. So.
Right. So no, well, it's just lovely being on this call. Tim, you and I have been having wonderful conversations. In yoga, we call those kinds of conversations satsangs, which is the company of truth. And since we met in person in Israel, we've been speaking, every 2-3 weeks or so. And it's been a very, very enriching relationship for me.
And for
I
me
feel
as well.
delighted. I feel delighted that there is a man, a Western man, halfway around the world.
White guy.
Who is in integrity with himself and is doing the best he can. And that we can actually find common ground, because that itself is a great starting point, because it's no longer theory, it's two real people having real dialogue. And if we can connect, then there's hope for many others.
Yeah, good. I would love to hear, Nilima, how you developed the skill and wisdom that you have with feminine leadership, because I know many women who have backgrounds in corporate leadership and are very powerful, and in my projection, my judgment, are very blind to the feminine power that they're capable of expressing. And I'm very curious to know, and I really don't know, how you found your way to your feminine power such that you're able to explain it so clearly.
Wonderful question, Tim. Thank you. My journey to spirituality began as late as 1998 when I was 32. And until then, I was a very secular girl, brought up in a very secular way. My dad was in the Indian Navy. So in India, we kind of hold our religion and our spirituality rather lightly. It's behind the scenes. We're not upfront about it, unlike what you're hearing perhaps more recently. So I didn't even think about, why am I born in India? Why am I born a Hindu? What does that even mean? What is our wisdom about? What does it really teach? It's only when I had an existential crisis at the age of 32, when after 10 years of corporate full-time work, I was at the height of my career looking after corporate communications for ESPN Star Sports across 25 countries. And I just found myself feeling empty. Feeling, is this it? Surely I have more to do in the world. I have always had a sense of purpose, and I didn't think I was fulfilling it in that job, even though by all the tick marks, it looked like it was done. You know, I had a great job, great money, got all the material trappings for it, had a wonderful husband, 2 gorgeous children. So began the study of yoga and Vedanta, I kind of went back to my own roots to search for meaning in my own existential emptiness. What is the purpose of life? Who am I? Why am I here? 2 years into that journey, I found yoga and Vedanta with the Swami Shivananda of the Divine Life Society lineage. And in Canada, there is the headquarters of this place, the International Shivananda Yoga Vedanta Center. 2 years into that journey, my husband got diagnosed with colon cancer. And so began a quest, not just for meaning and purpose, but for health and healing and recovery. It really required that this was now real. It had to be lived and applied. And it was a question of life and death now. So I found Mother and Sri Aurobindo very naturally in my search for integral health and well-being. Today is the birth anniversary of the person we call the Mother. She was born as Meera Alfasa, and she was the spiritual partner of Sri Aurobindo, who among Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, many others, counts as among India's greatest masters.
Mm-hmm.
It was this work, this tradition, this path of integral yoga, which in a way puts the concept of the divine feminine front and center, that really started for me the understanding of the role of the divine feminine in personal mastery and transformation and collective evolution, conscious evolution. Mm-hmm. So that's a whole body of work. I really believe you can have a lifetime and it's not enough to read everything they left behind. So it was a beautiful journey. It's not over yet, but I would say I spent about 9 years being almost like a monk in my own monastery, deeply, deeply, deeply immersing myself into understanding how does one practice connection with the divine feminine and why is it necessary. So in a nutshell, the way Sri Aurobindo explains it is all the spiritual traditions up until now have been tinged by the patriarchal culture in which it has been practiced. And so it develops spirituality through the divine masculine, which is in yoga, Shiva, the pure, unconditioned, eternal consciousness that is always witnessing the play of creation. But in the process, what has been neglected and perhaps even split as two separate practices is the complementary, necessary, interconnected other side of it, which you can't actually separate from it because they are one and the same, which is what the Shiva witnesses, what the Shiva element or principle witnesses, is the play of the creative force that births this creation. And that therefore is considered feminine because it gives birth and it evolves this creation. Much like a mother would. That's the mother principle, the divine feminine principle, and that's called Shakti.
This is in the West, we see this same split,
yes.
and especially in religion, in the last few thousand years, it's split towards the transcendent and towards the logos, right? So it's the understanding of the divine that's being sought, and so it's done through scripture and reading and prayer, and it's focusing on the aspect of the divine which is beyond understanding, as opposed to the immanent in the body, more ever present and organic aspect of the divine, which was more present thousands of years ago in more traditional practices.
True, absolutely. And in India, this understanding of the immanent divine that is in the evolution and providing the foundational base for a evolution to evolve around divine lines is something that hasn't been lost in the culture here. So unlike the West, where it has been systematically cut off, a friend of mine, Dr. Nilima Bhat has written a wonderful book called The Absent Mother God of the West, trying to explain this in a very scholarly way, researching the background to that. In India, though, this knowing of the feminine principle has been kept alive in a branch called Tantra. Now, unfortunately, Tantra has been understood and used over the years, not just in India, but even more so in the West, as the sexual force and how to apply the sexual force. But Tantra is not just the sexual force. It is all the combined forces, the power of creation itself, that animates it, that evolves it, right? So that is called Shakti. And Sri Aurobindo realized that if all the best spirituality we have had for thousands of years still brings us to where we are today, which is we may get mentally enlightened, but physically we still continue to experience decay, disease, and eventually death. He realized this is a rather, nature can't be satisfied with such an incomplete evolution and creation. That surely even this body-mind complex can find a way to achieve the level of perfection that spirit gives us. And so for that, we need the agency of Shakti. We need the power at work in the body, in the vital, in the mental, in the subconscious, inconscient, subliminal levels. We need the base divine power that is involved in it to be evolved out of it and then take that along with it. So that in a nutshell is integral yoga and why it puts the divine feminine principle front and center, saying we need the agency of that to drive change, to drive transformation. We need the divine feminine. To rest in the pure beingness is the divine masculine. And to witness the play is the divine masculine. But it's incomplete without the conscious play and the enabling of that play by the divine feminine.
Right.
And so why choose one or the other when you can have both?
Well, you can have both.
Yes.
Two great tastes that taste great together, as they used to say. So, now,
so
unlike...
That's how I came to the divine feminine. And over time, as I studied all this, I studied many other traditions to see how do they get in touch with the same element. It's not like yoga has, the copyright on it. It is a universal principle that's available to everybody. And so I found it through, I discovered the mythology. And mythology is a great place to find the divine feminine, So the mythology of the Greeks and the Romans and the shamanic traditions. And it's there. It's there everywhere when you start looking for it.
That's right. Now, many people who have a spiritual journey like that sort of leave the corporate world and never return.
Yes.
But you went to the mountain, drank from the fountain, and then came back to the marketplace.
Love it.
Bearing gifts. So what was it that motivated you to try to integrate this thing, which is so absent, poorly understood, and largely dismissed, into a culture that is at the very heart? I mean, the corporate hierarchies are in I would say in our world today, that's the heart of the patriarchy, right? That's the heart of the multi-level hierarchical masculine principle world that we chose to create some 5,500 years ago. This is its ultimate manifestation. And yet that's where you decided to come back to. So
I would say that is why I decided to come back to.
I had a suspicion. Straight into the belly of the beast.
Yeah. So exactly as you said, it's the hero's journey. I've been so influenced. One of my teachers I would consider is Joseph Campbell. So when he discovers the map of the initiate, that those among us who are thrown into an initiatory experience and who are fortunate enough to make the journey and meet our shadow, our greatest fear, die in some way, find ourselves resurrected through great acts of grace and will and courage, then have to come back. This journey is incomplete until you bring the elixir that's been found, the water in the well that you have drunk, that it's not just for you. The design, the grand design is so fabulous that it's not masochistic, that it puts you through suffering for no reason at all, and then you come out and feel good and it ends there. No, there's a greater purpose to this fabulous design, which is in the process of you're making the journey and making your own personal transformation and finding this elixir that is needed by your world, your community, your tribe, to heal its own wound and to complete itself and to move to its next level of evolution.
Right, and I hear you referencing Parsifal with the Grail, bringing it back to the wounded king to heal. Yeah, and actually, and this same the same pattern, in a certain sense, exists in the East. If you look at the bodhisattvas or the Zen ox herding woodcuts, where the last woodcut is the enlightened being coming back into the marketplace, right, with life-giving hands to return what's been found back to the people. This is the Mahayana, the great path of Buddhism, is exactly the same thing. So, and I have to tell you, there's so many times I've had corporate leader clients who have sold their company or left their job or whatever, and they come to me to find their higher purpose, and they're like, okay, well, I spent N years in marketing and I'm not like that anymore. And they find their purpose, and their higher self says, okay, now get your ass back in there and start transforming the marketing world, or wherever it was that they came from that they swore they would never return to. But of course, when you come back, you're not the same person as the one who left. So the experience of being in that environment is completely different.
And it's not as if you're welcomed back with open arms.
Not necessarily, no.
So there is yet another stage to the journey. You discover that it wasn't just difficult enough to have gone through your own death, but bringing your elixir back to an audience that's wondering what the fuss is about.
Wasn't shopping for elixir today.
Yeah. So you kind of do another journey all over again.
To create a market for elixir,
to be tested. And so I would say my journey that began in 1998, it's 20 years in 2018. That's how long it takes, or at least it took for me. Okay. And of which I would say 10 years were doing the personal underground journey for me, really coming out of my own death. But the last 10 years then that followed have been about finding a way to master the two worlds. So it's not enough to be master of your inner world. You also then have to become master of the outer world. And that's why Campbell talks about the master of two worlds, that you can't find freedom to live until you can master both these worlds. So
that's right. You need the skillful means in the outer world to be able to produce results. Otherwise, no one's going to want your elixir.
Yes. And so that took another 10 years, and I finally feel ready now. And that's why I wrote the book. And I would have felt out of integrity to write that book if I hadn't felt a level of readiness. It's only
well, I have to say, you've been working for Tata and Whole Foods Market and Vodafone and Microsoft while getting ready. So I'm keen to see what it looks like now that you're ready.
So, of course, we need practice, right? So practice, practice. And when I started, I had my husband with me for much of the time. Now, he, like you, has the very masculine, skilled approach and language. So he was like a good bridge between what I was bringing and what the corporate world needed. And he was able to translate
Yeah.
And so
And I
that
think
worked.
Raj Sisodia helped with that in your book, right? He's one of the
Yes,
founders of conscious capitalism. And so
yes,
he has a lot
yes,
of credibility in corporate circles, and so created probably a
yes.
smoother on-ramp for you there. So,
Interestingly, he has the credibility because he has the academic label,
yeah.
right? So that's the other thing. When you come back, you realize the soil you are returning to needs a certain level of reassurance, which doesn't necessarily come from the places they are seeking reassurance from.
Right, right.
Because the true transformational work that is needed is not necessarily being trained for in academia,
Mm-hmm.
right? And therefore, someone like a Raj, it was such a beautiful partnership because we realized how complementary we were in what we had to offer.
Mm-hmm.
That my work brought the lived experience, and his work brought the research and academic validation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, so the two both are needed to make real impact.
Well, and we think of this in my community as purposeful marketing, where you're trying to equip people with the information and the credibility and the social proof that they need so that they can say yes to what their heart wants to say yes to, right? You kind of
Yes.
give their mind what it needs to be able to relax. And this is one of the things I love about how you brand yourself and how you speak and how you teach, which is that you wear the change agency that you are on your sleeve. And I have a lot of respect for that, because a lot of people in our circumstances choose to fly under the radar. And you've been very bold and forthright in what you're teaching, and it's worked, right? You've gotten invited to the UN and to the Nobel people and all these other places by showing your true self. And I'm sure that you've been rejected along the way, but really the message is for those who are ready to hear it. And the rest of them, we don't need to worry about so much. So.
You know, you're so right about that. That was again part of the learning journey, that when you find this amazing elixir, you want the world to have it. So you think, oh my God, why can't this big company take it? Why can't that big company take it? And we want to go back and give it to the people we think need it the most. They don't necessarily want it. And
they may not be ready for it.
Exactly. That was my second point. So it's taken me a while to come to the understanding. So of course, those were great learning experiences. I also, like what I say in the book, turn your drama triangle into your dharma triangle. And this is David Emerald's amazing work of how he reframes the seeing yourself as a victim of, the stuff perpetrator.
The system, the patriarchy, them.
Yeah. How do you create and how do you turn the persecutor into a challenger to raise your own skills and your own game? So I used all those opportunities to really took the feedback as data. You know, it took me a while to not take it personally and go retreat, and go lick my wounds, but say, you know what, let's just hear what they have to say. And if I can't reach them, then what's the point? So let me learn how I can reach them. So I used all that as feedback, just as pure data, to get the truth at the kernel of what they were saying, leave out all the prejudice that came with it or the judgments that came with it, but really just raise my game. Yep. So that was one good thing that came. The other thing that I'm very clear about today, and this comes from, the levels of consciousness that, is out there in Sri Aurobindo's teachings and Ken Wilber and Don Beck, and, that there are people at different levels of consciousness. So we have to understand at what level are we best serving the world. Yes. And so there's no point going and trying to meet a level that's not ready for you. So to understand where you are and which is the level that is ready for you is the most efficient and the kindest use of your time and effort to yourself and everybody.
That's right. If you mischaracterize yourself, they can't say yes to you. So one of, I think it may be Audrey Seymour was one of the people on the call. It could have been her. So there's something about the Sherpa metaphor, right? And so you have to imagine that your job is to take people from this altitude to this altitude. And there's other people maybe who are supposed to take them from sea level to base camp, and other people who are maybe supposed to take them from here to the summit. It's just your job to do this, right? You don't have to worry about everybody else. Until they reach this level, they're not your problem. And once you get them to here, you're done with them. Now they belong to somebody else. And once you get that, it makes it so much easier to not take it personally, as you said.
And it's so much a classroom metaphor, right? I mean, we go through education. So you have a teacher for your second grade, and you have another teacher for your 10th, and you have another one for your PhD. And it's different each time. And what we have to, so there are natural hierarchies. That's good to understand and accept. But to understand that one doesn't become less and the other doesn't become more. That you're not disempowering one level and over-empowering another level. That is where we lose it. Or we do not distribute the power. And that is why we come right back to Shakti Leadership. Which is
the various interesting power dynamics we create when left to our own devices. So speaking of which, I want to talk about this, because this is something I independently was given by my trusted sources, almost identical content. I'm in the Shakti Leadership book now. It's on page 9, and again on page 92. You talk about this idea of the healthy and unhealthy masculine and the healthy and unhealthy feminine. And the way you phrase it is slightly different than what I got, but they're very, very similar. And I'd love for you to talk about that. So, because I think that the world we have seems to me to be largely a articulation of the unhealthy masculine with some healthy masculine and some unhealthy feminine. But I would love to hear your take on all that, how you define them, and then how you would see the kind of where we are as a society right now.
So I think where we are as a society for ages is a reflection of the human consciousness, which doesn't know how to co-hold polarity, which tends to slip and fall either in one or in the other. We simply, as humans, have not been able to get to both and. So right there, we think it's either one way of being, and then we give it power over another way of being. So we forget that, and this is where the work of Barry Johnson and polarity partnerships is so brilliant in its simplicity. And of course, as he says, it comes from traditions such as the Tao. And the Chinese figured this out millennia ago, and the Indian tradition of Shiva Shakti. But I love the way the Chinese do it. It's as simple as yin and yang, that you can't have yin without yang, you can't have yang without yin. And it is the interplay of these two forces within a system that keeps the system in balance and healthy. Otherwise, if you have too much of one and not enough of the other, the system falls into disequilibrium. It's as simple as that. So when we have overvalued men over women in the patriarchy, when we have overvalued masculine capacities over feminine capacities in the patriarchy, we have created a tremendous imbalance in the system, right? And so the system will always seek to balance itself. So because the system is hyper masculine right now, whether you look at our politics, our religion, our society, our economics, and
business, the way government, military, you just kind of go down the list, right?
Right. So because the problem happens at a systemic level on which all these things sit. So it expresses itself through all of them, right? So because the system is hyper masculine, there is a backlash. There is a natural, I love the way the Star Wars trilogy nailed it, saying first you have the Star Wars, but then the Empire Strikes Back, right? And only then do you know, the Return of the Jedi, etc., etc. So there is a constant between the so-called polarized forces. There's a constant one seeking to overcome the other. Okay, and so we have the feminism movement that has started. Now, in the process, we may tend to only look at the feminine capacities as healthy, positive capacities.
And then the masculine ones as bad.
Yes. Because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the masculine in its very unhealthy expression because it's reached its unhealthy expression, right? That's what we see. Yep. And therefore, we're right in wanting to balance it with bringing on positive feminine energy, right? But in the process, we forget that the feminine positive energy too has a shadow side, because done to its excess, done to the neglect of the healthy masculine and partnership with it, it can become unhealthy as well. So we look at beautiful feminine qualities saying the world needs more kindness, it needs more compassion, it needs more collaboration, it needs more fluidity, it needs more juice. Yes, that's all the amazing positive feminine. But if we say that's all we're going to focus on and we're going to chop away the masculine side of our psyche and our values and our behaviors.
Because
then,
it's so obvious that it's bad based on all the stuff it's created.
Then we are going to fall into the excessive feminine to the neglect of the masculine. And that would be, as someone recently said, we go from mothering to smothering. Yeah. Excessive feminine smothers. It becomes needy. It becomes manipulative. It has some not so comfortable aspects for sure.
Chaotic at times.
Yes, yes. Oh, Shiva Shakti is very clear about that, saying Shiva without Shakti is sterile, impotent, right? But Shakti without Shiva is chaos. Because you need that anchoring, centering axis around which the creative force can organize itself. Otherwise, without that, it scatters and is chaotic.
Right. As my teachers put it, they said that the masculine taken to extreme is like a concrete slab. The feminine taken to its extreme is like a jungle. And if you can mix the two in a healthy way, you get a garden and now you can grow something. Right?
Yes. And that's why I love the way the Sufis put this so beautifully. I've been practicing Sufism. I would say Mevlana Rumi is also one of my great masters. In the 99 names of the beloved, number 88 is of your life, the most beautiful garden make. Right? And then, of course, number 89 goes on to say, you're done with creating a beautiful garden of your own life. Now go out there and become a gardener to life's larger garden. So even in those 99 names, there's a beautiful unfolding of how we progress. So let's to complete the healthy and unhealthy masculine feminine, we know the unhealthy masculine is, corrupt and power hungry and very often spiritually empty and rigid.
Unaware of its impact.
Yes. And then the healthy masculine, which would be the divine masculine expressions, everything from stillness, clarity, confidence,
vision,
strength.
Purpose.
Yes. So, and perhaps for each of us, we need to identify our own definitions of what is healthy masculine and healthy feminine, and our own personal definitions of what is our unhealthy masculine and our unhealthy feminine. And if you don't like the words masculine, feminine, call them A and B.
Right. 0 or 1. In the I Ching, it's dark and light, whatever floats your boat. Yeah.
Exactly. Because sometimes what happens is we get caught in the language and then we miss the bigger intention of the message. So please understand, is my message to everybody, that everything exists in a complementary polarity.
Right.
And therefore, it's like saying, even look at it, when I inhale, I have to exhale. If I only inhale, and I love inhaling, and I think I have to choose between inhaling and exhaling, this is again from the polarity work. It's a ridiculous choice. It's not a viable choice. Something's going to give and you're going to die, So we can't choose to be only masculine and only feminine. We need to understand that within us exists a basic polarity. And you can't, people often say, but it's all one. If it were all one, then the basic primal diversity of the two would not have been created by creation. The fact that it's been created by creation means it serves a purpose and it's necessary. Right?
Well, if it's all one, then there's nobody to play with, is the fundamental problem. So.
Yes. So actually, we either tend to slip back into saying it's all one, or we come into the duality and then we choose only the masculine.
Pick one and make the other one wrong. Yep.
Yes. And either ways, we miss out on the power, potency, and the necessity of the two, which is the feminine principle. In both the one and the two. And so one of the new words I have heard a couple of years ago is the concept of a triality, saying beyond the unity and the duality, can we understand the triality of holding the ground of oneness in which we have equal access to a mature and beautifully expressed yin and yang, Shiva, Shakti, masculine, feminine, A, B, whatever, right? And that is very, very basic. What are these two principles? One principle is called the active principle of life, and the other is the receptive principle of life. And they are separate forces, whether we like it or not. Eventually, they become a continuum.
Right.
But they are also separate forces. You can't pretend the active
specifically the active that our culture has focused on for thousands of years now as being the way, and the receptive that has been either misunderstood, devalued, ignored, or just fallen into the unconscious, and people are completely unaware of it. So, and I work with this a lot with female CEOs and leaders who themselves really have judged and suppressed their own receptive capabilities and are hampering their ability to lead as a result. My dog seems to have an opinion about this. So,
I think, thank you for reminding me this very important point, which is kind of summing up everything we're saying so far, is the game is about power. It's so fundamental. From the time you're born, you start negotiating for power, because without power, nothing is animated. It's the fuel of life. And so we realize the most fundamental thing of value is power. And so we start manipulating for it, fighting for it, finding ways to have it if it doesn't come to us easily and naturally, right? And because we think, when the minute we overvalue the masculine way, we have vested value into it. We have empowered it. So now both men and women want to behave in that way, because what they really want is to feel and be empowered, to have agency. And in my work, what I'm bringing to people is the understanding that why work with these limited batteries of man-made power and privilege when there is a universal, eternal, infinite source that you can plug into.
Good. And this is, I want to hear more about this in a minute, but because I want to know how you teach this. But first, I just want to make sure that people have nowhere to go to learn more about you, because I know that you're coming to the US soon, and there's going to be some opportunities to learn from you. So if you're interested in learning more about Nilima, in a moment, I'm going to ask her how she teaches this. First, we're going to learn a little bit about where she's going to be teaching this, but how she teaches this to women and men, but especially women. And then we're going to take Q&A after that. So Nilima is coming to the US very soon, and Canada as well. So join me at shaktileadership.com. Let me put that into the, actually, I'm just going to put this URL right in here where your tour is into the chat. So I'm going to send this to everyone. There we go. And I'll put that there. Boom, there's the link. Good, so everyone should be able to see that. So if you click on that, it'll take you to where Nilima is going to be in the next, mostly through, looks like March here, which is starting very soon. Yeah. So just calling out a few highlights. So Nilima is going to be in Chicago, speaking at the Conscious Capitalism event there. And again, thank you to Andy Swindler, who's part of the Conscious Capitalism community in Chicago, who introduced me into Nilima. Another shout out to Andy. Thank you, Andy. And that'll be a Conscious Capitalism event on March 8th, followed by a CEO breakfast on March 9th. I've done that too for their wonderful community. So if you're in Chicago or near Chicago, that's a great place. Nilima and I are both going to be in Montreal on March 14th and 15th, speaking at the Global Summit for Conscious Leadership. And on the 15th, you're going to do a day-long workshop, right?
Yes.
And I can take that workshop? I'm
yes.
planning on, okay, good, I'm coming. So that's where I'm going to do it. But I especially want to hear, Nilima, about the Esalen workshop on March 18th through 23rd. So that's like 5 days or something. That's like a serious training in Shakti leadership. Tell us about what will be going on there.
Well, Raj and I have been invited to Esalen for some years now. I'm sure your community would have heard of this incredibly powerful, beautiful place on the Big Sur, 2.5 hour drive from San Francisco. So we have done weekends there. And we realized, of course, Shakti leadership and the tenets of conscious capitalism, we need to create an immersive experience, how to give people tools and skills they can practice in a right cohort, in a beautiful setting. So this is what they're going to get to do. They're really going to, I have new content. We have another co-facilitator called Ashley Monday, who's certified in Barrett values. She also knows the levels of consciousness work and the theory U work. So it's going to be, I'm just so excited because one of the things I love doing is designing the retreat experience. And it's such a powerful, personal, transformational journey experience that we've designed, which will bring them out at the end of it with a true sense of purpose and how to get there.
Great. And I just went to Esalen, ESALEN.org.
Yes.
And I typed in Shakti, and there I am. Actually, I can put this link in there too. And then, of course, there's your book, Shakti Leadership, which I've been quoting liberally from here. So
yes.
Excellent. So, so let's say that I wanted to devote myself to the path of Shakti leadership. How do you teach that? Like, how does one learn how to do this to express feminine leadership?
Right. So we have a model, and it's always easy to give people something they can count on their fingers and remember. So it's called the 5 elements model of Shakti leadership. And we teach each of these elements. And whatever you practice, you get good at. So it's really about knowing what you need to do and then practice, practice, practice. So the first element is cultivating presence. And without that, you can read all the books you want, you can go to all the workshops you want, but you're not going to get to Shakti. So the ability to drop into your deepest self and how to be present. And we have a guided practice that step by step takes you to a place of presence. From a place of presence where you have nothing to defend, promote, or fear, and you get in touch with your true power that is flowing through you 24/7, but now you can engage with it, you can invoke it, you can dialogue it. You now get in touch with your own Shakti and you start practicing accessing, embodying, and manifesting that power versus your regular ego-based dynamic. And this is a practice in becoming mindful of how you do power. So right now, even in this conversation, from a place of presence, I am very aware that I am doing a win-win, I'm okay, you're okay kind of conversation with you. So that's when Shakti is flowing between us. Versus if I were thinking about, oh, am I saying something smart and clever and,
how can I show them that I'm smarter than Tim?
Yeah. or whatever is, us has our own scoping strategies when we are out of touch with our Shakti, right? So that whole practice, the second practice, is about really becoming mindful of how do I exercise my power and how can I step more into exercising my true power, which is Shakti. Then comes the three capacities from presence and power, which is becoming psychologically wholeness, the mastering your four drives that the Jungians talk about. We have the two somatic drives of Eros and Thanatos, and the two psychic drives of Logos and Mythos. And in the integral yoga is the understanding that the four great powers of wisdom, strength, harmony, and perfection are what transform and transmute these unconscious drives into their fully human divine expressions. So how do I become psychologically whole? Becoming my own parent, my own child, my own man and my own woman. And I call it the wise fool of tough love. And this again becomes a very simple handle to hold at any time. In each moment, if I'm faced with a leadership crisis or challenge, to check in, to first become present and to check in, do I need to be wise in this moment? Do I need to be foolish, lighten up and childlike? Do I need to be tough, draw those healthy boundaries, call out what's unacceptable? Or do I be love, which is harmonious, accepting, flexible? So once I become psychologically whole, I have the fourth element, which is becoming flexible. And that is a very, very key, the capacity for agility, because otherwise we leaders tend to get rigid and stultified in one way of responding to every situation. So developing that, and again, body work, I'm a dancer, I'm a yoga teacher. So I put a lot of somatic body work, embedding this into our muscle memory, the ability to flex. And finally, from a place of wholeness and flexibility, you get to congruence. And this is where it maps onto your work, finding your dharma, and then being on purpose with it, knowing who you are and where you're going with it. What is your purpose, and staying true to that. And because in your purpose lies your power as well. So there's lots of Shakti locked up in your purpose. If you can tap into it.
No argument here.
If you can tap into that Shakti river of your purpose, whoa, there's very little work to be done after that. Then you can flow.
Excellent. Let's take some questions. I haven't seen any typed yet, but folks, if you press the participant button, you should see a list of participants, and you should see down at the bottom of the list a raise hand button. So you can either type a question into the chat window, or you can press the raise hand button to ask a question. And we only have time for a couple. I saw a fleeting hand from okay, just a raise hand button. All right, so no participant list, but there is a raise hand button. Barbara, I saw your hand go up briefly. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but let's unmute Barbara.
There we go, now I've got everything. I'm fine, I was just trying to find a participants button. There isn't one on ours.
And folks, by the way, if you hit the gallery view on the upper right, you can see all of us at the same time. Was there something you wanted to say, Barbara, or was this entirely accidental?
No, I was just trying to find the gallery view. There wasn't a gallery view showing on my screen. So I was just curious who else is here.
Okay, good, cool. All right.
Now that I'm on here.
Now that you're here.
This is really, Nilima and Tim, I really want to thank you, because this is really important for me in my life, and for how I am and what's going on in my life right now. And it follows along with so much other work that I've done. So I'm finding it fascinating, and the piece, it feels like pieces that I'm going to get your book, because it feels like pieces that I've been looking for and never found available, and ways of holding it, and I really, really appreciate that. So I don't have a particular question. I just want to say thank you to both of you.
Thanks for the shout out.
And to Andy. Thank you, Andy.
Yes, really. Thanks to Andy
for making this happen.
Good. Cool. All right.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
And we'll put Barbara back to an attendee, and let's see if there are any other hands up. Looks like there are some hands up. Let's see if I can find them. Oh, Andy wants to talk. We definitely have to hear from Andy. As soon as, there we go. All right, Andy. I'm not able to unmute. There we go.
Hello.
Hey.
Seemed like I needed to make an appearance.
We've been using your name all evening.
Thanks for this.
Looks like I may have made a mistake and demoted Nilima instead of Barbara. Just go ahead. Well, I'll get this sorted out.
Well, I was, I think I have a fair understanding of this, but I thought it might be interesting just to chat about some of the vocabulary, masculine, feminine versus male and female, and some of the other things that come up as these are concepts. I think people quickly grab on to sort of preconceived notions and biases and things about that. And I'm curious actually in both of your work, how those sorts of things come up, and what are the reactions, and how do you explain through that and get to a more useful conversation?
Lima, you want to take a crack at that?
Yes, thank you. I realized I didn't clarify that. So male and female, and of course we have transgender as well. So that's just biology. But masculine and feminine is an ability to express oneself that exists in all genders. So masculine and feminine, at least the way I'm describing it, which comes more from the Eastern Taoist and yogic tradition, Shiva, Shakti, Yin Yang, in English we are calling it masculine, feminine, is available to every human being as a psychological and even a somatic capacity.
Good. And I would add to that, Andy, that in my experience with doing this kind of work, if people haven't done much work with this kind of material, or if they haven't done much shadow work, starting a conversation about masculine and feminine is like tap dancing in a minefield. And that people will very quickly start to become reactive based on unresolved psychological material they have from childhood about how what they perceived to be masculine or feminine qualities were valued or criticized by their parents, and the dynamic between their parents and all sorts of other stuff like that. So my experience says go easy at the beginning. Now in my community, we've got tons of people who've done parts work, and guys who've done the sword and scepter workshop and things like that. So there's a relatively high degree of maturity around this stuff, so we can just kind of dive into it. Yes. But earlier today, when I was talking about this call on the voice dialogue training, and you were there, I was watching in the chat, and two women started talking about the negative reaction they were having to Nilima and her work after looking at her website when I started to talk about it. But bless their hearts, because we were doing a class on shadow and reactions, they immediately started to speculate about what was going on inside of themselves that would cause them to have that reaction. And one of them said something like, it might be some unconscious hatred of the feminine I haven't examined yet. I was like, yes, you go, girl.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a longer, more entertaining answer than you may have sought. So.
Yeah, we're all victims of victims, and we've all been wounded by the patriarchy. And so we all have the work of Bethany Webster, why it's critical to heal the mother wound for both men and women. There's just so much there. It gets dark and painful. And that's why I'm so glad you're doing the shadow work, because the feminine has been deeply, deeply, deeply suppressed.
Yeah,
and
good.
therefore even distorted.
Thank you, Andy. And we're just a hair over here, but we're going to take one more one more question because I can't help myself, low self-control. So we will go and take one last question from Risa. There we go. Gotta wait for Risa to show up. There's Risa. Hi, Risa. So nice
Hi.
to see you again.
Hello, Nima.
Hello, Rita.
The questions I have, because I've been contending with this whole duality thing, it feels like most of my life. And, you know, many women have taken on what some people call a masculine shell in order to navigate through the world of the patriarchy. Yeah. And I'm one of them. And it's been a real struggle to lift that off and leave it aside and find my more authentic feminine self, allowing her to emerge. And I'm wondering, does your book talk about this? Because frankly, though I've been looking, and I had a meditation practice, transcendental meditation for 35 years. And, you know, many of the masculine forms of seeking depth and spiritual evolution and enlightenment. So it's kind of like, though I love it and it gave me so much, I just know it's not satisfying me. And though I've been looking for an expression to not devote myself to so much as to be inspired by, that is the struggle I am experiencing personally. And I see it amongst so many women that I know.
What a great note to end on. Go ahead, Nilima.
So the short answer is yes. This is precisely why I wrote the book, to not just talk about the hero's journey, but also the heroine's journey, which is what Maureen Murdoch has worked on, a bunch of other amazing women have worked on. How do women make the journey to their wholeness? What I have added to that is, how can a woman journey consciously instead of having to wait for some kind of a crisis or trauma?
Oh, yes.
So I think you will love that section. And I realized that there is no way out but through a tremendous amount of grieving. We have to sit and not just experience and move through our rage, but beneath the rage is grief.
So much pain.
Such tremendous grief.
Yes.
And you've got to sit with it, presence it, lay your loss to rest. It's like burying a loved one, which is the loss of time and life spent in a particular way of being. And, you know, as a result, all the parts of you that you missed out on. And that's not going to come back in this lifetime, right? So, and the pain of the collective consciousness of women over thousands of years, that will also overtake you sometimes. And I would caution, when you sit and do this grief presencing work, you be very anchored, and you ask actively your trusted sources to guide and protect you, so that you only process what's yours and not bring in the collectives, because that can overwhelm you. You can go into a deep depression. So be very careful.
And only what you can handle in one sitting, right? Take it in bite-sized chunks.
Yes, always. And be kind. Be very, very kind to yourself and to everybody, even the so-called men and the people who have caused the pain.
Excellent. Thank you, Risa. So delightful, delightful question to end on. And thank you so much, Nilima. This has been delightful. It's everything I'd hoped, wanting my community to have what I've been having in our chats, and what I know Andy knows of you already, so that they can hear a real live example of someone who not only knows and embodies, but also teaches leadership based on the divine feminine. It's so needed in our culture right now, and we cannot balance these forces and create heaven on earth and receive earth without this element being brought in. So thank you so much for the work that you do in the world, and thank you so much for bringing it here to our little community.
Well, I'm just so grateful to you and your community, because when I said earlier, I need to find the soil that is ready for what I have to bring, it's you and your community. And it's such a wonderful, delightful satsang then. It fulfills all of us deeply. And I would like to give a shout out to my partners, Tiara International and Betsy Sobiak, who's made this platform available today. So much goodwill goes into making these things happen. And so thank you, Tiara, and thank you, Betsy, who's silent in the background.
Excellent. Yep. And so please get yourself a copy of Shakti Leadership. Go to shaktileadership.com and look at where you can see more of Nilima and learn from her work. If you come to, I won't be at Esalen, but if you come to Montreal and take the workshop there, I'll be a participant sitting next to you, learning from the master or the mistress or whatever we call, however we frame that about this. So thank you so much, Nilima. Thank you, Betsy. And have a good evening. And if you're in India, a wonderful morning, and take some divine feminine out into the day with you. So.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank
Truly.
you. Bye, everybody.